The Uses of Enchantment, the Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales by Bruno Bettelheim. From Part 1, A Pocket Full of Magic. Tales of Two Brothers. Unlike brother and sister in other fairy tales in which two protagonists, usually brothers, stand for seemingly incompatible aspects of the human personality, the two usually separate after an original period of having been united and then having different fates. In these fairy tales, which, though little noticed today, are among the oldest and most widely disseminated ones, the stay-at-home brother and the adventurous one remain in touch through magic. When the adventurous brother perishes because he has permitted himself to live in accordance with his desires or to disregard dangers, his brother sets out to rescue him, succeeds, and forever after the two live happily reunited. The details vary. Sometimes, though rarely, instead of two brothers, there are two sisters, or a brother and a sister. What all of these stories have in common are features which suggest the identity of the two heroes, one of whom is cautious and reasonable but ready to risk his life to rescue the other brother who foolishly exposes himself to terrible perils, and also some magic object, a life token, which usually disintegrates as soon as one dies, serving as the sign for the other to set out on the rescue. The motif of the two brothers is central to the oldest fairy tale, which was found in an Egyptian papyrus of 1250 BC. In over 3,000 years since then, it has taken on many forms. One study enumerates 770 different versions, but probably there are many more. In some versions, one meaning becomes more prominent, in others, another. The full flavor of a fairy story can best be gained by not only retelling it or by hearing it many times, then some detail at first overlooked becomes ever more meaningful or is seen in a new light, but also through becoming acquainted with the same motif in several variations. In all variations of this tale, the two figures symbolize opposite aspects of our nature, impelling us to act in contrary ways. In brother and sister, the choices are whether to follow the proddings of our animal nature or to restrain the expression of our physical desires for the sake of our humanity. The figures thus give concrete embodiment to an internal dialogue that we engage in when we consider what course to take. The stories on the two brothers theme add to this internal dialogue between id, ego, and superego another dichotomy, the striving for independence and self-assertion, and the opposite tendency to remain safely home tied to the parents. From the earliest version on, the stories stress that both desires reside in each of us, and that we cannot survive deprived of either, the wish to stay tied to the past and the urge to reach out to a new future. Through the unfolding of the events, the story most often teaches that entirely cutting oneself off from one's past leads to disaster, but that to exist only beholden to the past is stunting. While it is safe, it provides no life of one's own. Only through the integration of these contrary tendencies permits a successful existence. While in most fairy tales on the two brothers theme, the brother who leaves home runs into trouble and is rescued by the brother who stayed home, some others, including the oldest Egyptian version, stress the opposite, the undoing of the brother who remained home. If we do not spread our wings and leave the nest, these stories seem to teach we fail to do so out of an Oedipal attachment, which then destroys us. This ancient Egyptian story seems to have developed out and away from the central motif of the destructive nature of Oedipal attachments and of sibling rivalry, that is, the need to separate oneself from one's childhood home and create an independent existence. A happy resolution requires that the brothers free themselves from Oedipal and sibling jealousy and support each other. In the Egyptian tale, the younger and unmarried brother rejects the efforts of his brother's wife to seduce him. Fearing that he might tell on her, she vilifies him, pretending to her husband that his brother tried to seduce her. In his jealous anger, the married brother tries to kill his younger sibling. Only through the intervention of gods is the younger brother's reputation saved and the truth made known, but by then the younger brother has sought safety in flight. He dies, a fact that becomes known to his older brother when his drinks turn bad. He goes to the rescue of his younger brother and manages to revive him. This ancient Egyptian tale contains the element of a person accused of what the accuser himself wants to do. The wife accuses the younger brother, whom she tried to seduce, of seducing her. Thus, the plot describes the projection of an unacceptable tendency in oneself onto another person. This suggests that such projections are as ancient as man. Since the story is told from the brother's side, it's also possible that the younger brother projected his desires onto his older brother's wife, accusing her of what he wanted to, but dared not do. In the story, the married brother is master of an extended household in which his younger brother lives. The master's wife is, in a sense, mother to all the young people in this family, including the younger brother. So we can interpret the story as telling either about a mother figure who gives in to her Oedipal desires for a young man who stands in role of a son, or a son accusing a mother figure of his own Oedipal desires for her. Be this as it may, the story clearly suggests that for the younger son's benefit and for the protection against Oedipal problems, irrespective of whether these are the sons or the parents, at this time of life, the young person does well to leave home. In this ancient rendering of the two brothers theme, the tale barely touches on the need for inner transformation to bring about the happy solution in the form of the persecuting brother's deep regret when he learns that his wife has unfairly accused his younger sibling, whom he had set out to destroy. In this form, the tale is essentially a cautionary one, warning that we must free ourselves of our Oedipal attachments, and teaching that we can do so most successfully by establishing an independent existence away from our parental home. Sibling rivalry is also shown as a strong motif in this tale, as the first impulse of the older brother is to kill his sibling out of jealousy. His better nature battles against his lower impulses and eventually wins. In the stories of the two brothers type, the heroes are depicted as being in what we would call the adolescent age, that period in life when the relative emotional tranquility of the prepubertal child is replaced by adolescent stress and turmoil brought about by new psychological developments. Hearing such a story, the child comprehends, at least subconsciously, that although what he is told about are adolescent conflicts, the problems are typical of our predicament whenever we are confronted with having to move from one developmental stage to the next. This conflict is as characteristic of the Oedipal child as it is of the adolescent. It occurs whenever we have to decide whether to move from a less to a more differentiated state of mind and personality, which requires loosening old ties before we have yet formed new ones. In more modern versions, such as the Brothers Grimm's tale, The Two Brothers, they are at first undifferentiated. The two brothers went together into the forest, took counsel with each other, and came to an agreement. And as they sat down in the evening to eat, they said to their foster father, "We won't touch the food and won't take a bite until you grant us one request. Their demand is that we must try ourselves in the world, so permit us to go forth and journey." The forest, where they go to decide that they want to have a life of their own, symbolizes the place in which inner darkness is confronted and worked through, where uncertainty is resolved about who one is, and where one begins to understand who one wants to be. In most stories of two brothers, one, like Sinbad the sailor, rushes out into the world and courts dangers, while the other, like Sinbad the porter, simply remains home. In many European fairy tales, the brother who leaves soon finds himself in a deep, dark forest where he feels lost, having given up the organization of his life which the parental home provided, and not yet having built up the inner structures which we develop under the impact of life experiences we have to master more or less on our own. Since ancient times, the near impenetrable forest in which we get lost has symbolized the dark, hidden, near impenetrable world of our unconscious. If we have lost the framework which gave structure to our past life and must now find our own way to become ourselves and have entered this wilderness with an as yet undeveloped personality, when we succeed in finding our way out, we shall emerge with much more highly developed humanity. In this dark forest, the fairy tale hero often encounters the creation of our wishes and anxieties, the witch, as does one of the brothers in the Brothers Grimm's tale, The Two Brothers. Who would not like to have the power of the witch, or a fairy, or a sorcerer, and use it to satisfy all his desires, to give him all the good things he wishes for himself, and to punish his enemies? And who does not fear such powers if some other possessed them, and might use them against him? The witch, more than other creations of our imagination which we have invested with magic powers, the fairy and the sorcerer, in her opposite aspects, is a reincarnation of the all-good mother of infancy and the all-bad mother of Oedipal crisis. But she is no longer seen halfway realistically as a mother who is lovingly all-giving and an opposite stepmother who is rejectingly demanding, but entirely unrealistically as either superhumanly rewarding or inhumanly destructive. These two aspects of the witch are clearly delineated in fairy tales where the hero, lost in the forest, encounters an irresistibly attractive witch who, at first, satisfies all his desires during the relation. This is the all-giving mother of our infancy, whom we all hope to encounter again in our life. Preconsciously or unconsciously, it is this hope of finding her somewhere which gives us the strength to leave home. Thus, in fairy story manner, we are given to understand that false hopes often lure us on when we fool ourselves that all we are seeking is an independent existence. After the witch has fulfilled all the desires of the hero who went out into the world, at some point, usually when he refuses to do her bidding, she turns against him and changes him into an animal or into stone. That is, she deprives him of all humanity. In these stories, the witch resembles the way in which the pre-Oedipal mother appears to the child, all giving, all satisfying, as long as he does not insist on doing things his way and remains symbiotically tied to her. But as the child begins to assert himself more and do more on his own, the no's naturally increase. The child who has put all his trust in this woman, has tied his fate to her, or felt that it is tied to her, now experiences deepest disenchantment. What has given him bread has turned to stone, or so it seems. Whatever the details, in the story of the two brothers type, there comes the moment when the brothers differentiate from each other, as every child has to move out of the undifferentiated stage. What happens then symbolizes as much the inner conflict within us, represented by the different actions of the two brothers, as the necessity to give up one form of existence to achieve a higher one. Whatever the age of person, when he is confronted with the problem of whether to break away from his parents, which we all do to different degrees at various times in our lives, there is always a wish to have an existence entirely free of them and what they stand for in psyche, along with the opposite desire to remain bound closely to them. This is acutely so during the period that immediately precedes school age, and also during the other one which ends it. The first of the two separates infancy from childhood, the second childhood from early adulthood. The Brothers Grimm's The Two Brothers begins by impressing the hearer with the idea that tragedy occurs if the two brothers, i.e. the two divergent aspects of our personality, do not become integrated. It starts, once upon a time there were two brothers, a rich one and a poor one. The rich one was a goldsmith, and his heart was evil. The poor one sustained himself by making brooms, and he was good and honest. The poor man had two children who were twins and looked so alike as one drop of water is to another. The good brother finds a golden bird, and in a roundabout way his twin children, through eating the heart and liver of the bird, acquire the ability to find each morning a piece of gold under their pillows. The evil brother, eaten up by envy, persuades the father of the twins that this is the doing of the devil, and that for his salvation he must rid himself of the boys. Confounded by his evil brother, the father casts the children out, 100 chances upon them, and adopts them as his foster children. After the children have grown, they retire into the forest and decide there that they must go into the world. Their foster father agrees that they ought to do so, and on parting gives them a knife, which is the magic object of this story. As was mentioned at the beginning of the discussion of the two brothers motif, one typical feature of these stories is that some magic life token which symbolizes the identity of the two indicates to one when the other is in serious danger, and this sets the rescue going. If, as suggested above, the two brothers stand for the inner psychic processes which must all be functioning together for us to exist, then the dying or rotting of the magic object, that is, its disintegration, suggests that the disintegration of our personality, if not all of its aspects, are cooperating. In The Two Brothers, the magic object is a bright and shiny knife, which their foster father gives them on parting, telling them, "If you separate one day, drive the knife into a tree at the crossroad. If one returns, he can see from it how things stand with the absent one, because the side of the knife in the direction of which he left rusts if he dies. As long as he is alive, it remains shiny." The twin brothers part after having struck the knife in a tree and lead different lives. After many adventures, one is turned into stone by a witch. The other happens upon the knife and finds his brother's side of it rusty. Realizing that his brother has died, he goes to rescue him and succeeds. After the brothers are united, which is a symbol of having achieved integration of the discordant tendencies within us, they live happily ever after. By juxtaposing what happens between the good and the evil brother and the twin sons of the first, the story implies that if the contradictory aspects of the personality remain separated from each other, nothing but misery is the consequence. Even the good brother is defeated by life. He loses his sons because he fails to comprehend the evil propensities of our nature, represented by his brother, and hence is helpless to free himself of its consequences. The twin brothers, by contrast, after having lived very different lives, come to each other's rescue, which symbolizes achieving inner integration and hence can have a happy life.